Hi, so I'm going to do my first cloth pad construction tutorial today. And I wanted to make it as simple and as accessible as I could make it. So I'm going to do a repurposed, upcycled cloth pad tutorial. When I first started making cloth pads, I did watch several YouTube tutorials about how to make them out of materials that you have around your home. And I found that even the most basic materials I felt like I didn't have. I live in the South, it's hot, we don't have flannel sheets, I don't have a lot of fleece warm stuff that I'm ready to sort of get rid of. I don't wear through that stuff as quickly. And you know, I really couldn't find any of them that exactly matched what I had and was willing to cut up. So if you feel like you're in a similar situation, this might be a good video for you. And I'm going to try and walk you through, since there's not going to be a water resistant layer in this pad, I'm going to try and walk you through what accommodations you should make in terms of making sure that it's you're using it correctly and it's cared for correctly and all that kind of stuff. So blah blah blah. You will want to start with some kind of pattern. I can do a separate pattern tutorial, but Amy Nix has a really fantastic one that's very thorough. So if you are nervous about making a pattern or you haven't ever made a pattern, it's a much less intimidating process than it seems, but I would definitely recommend that video if you have questions about that. But I'm going to use an existing pattern of mine. And I have two patterns here. One is for the pad shape. So this is a 9-inch pad. The pattern's about 9 3/4 inches long. And I've kind of roughly outlined here what will actually show it as the finished pad. And then I have a separate pattern for the core. It doesn't have to be flared like this. It can just be a big old rectangle with a rectangle across it for the wings. But you will want to start with something that you can cut out that you know is going to give you a relatively even shape. So then the only materials I'm going to use are a tie-dye t-shirt I got free at an event that I probably will never wear. Now I'll wear it every month. And an old hand towel. This is a terry hand towel that's got some stains and is kind of like in that sort of like rag bin category of towels. So this is going to be the core. And the jersey t-shirt is going to be both the topper and the bottom. What that means is that you're not going to have a waterproof layer or a water resistant layer in your pad at all. So 2 layers of terry, which normally I would consider kind of on the heavy side of moderate, is going to be just kind of like a regular pad. You're going to want to be confident that you can change it if your flow is heavier, or if you're using it for incontinence, that you have, you know, like you normally would, but you want to be conscious that you have backup available, and that you have another fresh pad that you can change when it's appropriate. So that's what we're going to do. So let me adjust the camera here. So the first thing we're going to do is cut out the topper. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a square around this whole thing. Maybe do we want like all orangey? It's kind of fun when you have a see-through pattern. You can kind of decide. So I'm going to cut a square around it so we have a smaller area to work with. And then on one of those, we are going to cut the shape of the pad. So, and obviously you can do this with scissors or whatever cutting tools. This guy needs serious sharpening. Whatever cutting tool you like to use is fine. I forgot to mention, I'm going to use my sewing machine. If you don't have a sewing machine or you're not confident with it, you can certainly do this by hand. It's going to be a longer process, but it's definitely an option for you. So I just separated those two, so we have two separate layers, and I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily decide one is going to be the topper, and I'm going to use a felt tip Crayola marker just to trace around it. I'm using a black one because some of these colors are really dark and I want to make sure that I can see them. And I did give myself this little tab here to give me enough fabric so that when I turn it inside out, there's enough fabric in there that we can easily top stitch and close that hole without having to fill too much and just without worrying that it's going to come apart or fray in the future. So there's my pattern, and then I'm just going to cut it out. So I'm just going to cut this out and I'll be right back. Okay, so our topper's cut out here. That's what the top of our pad is going to look like. I actually think it's really pretty. So we'll set that aside and then we can cut out the core. So when you're measuring to draw the pattern for your core, you can see on this copy of my pad pattern, I have sort of traced on basically the core shape, but you're basically going to want to go in like 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch inside the outline of your pad, because you want that bulk to be inside the final seam. You don't have to want to sew over all these layers constantly throughout the process. You want it to be smooth on top. You don't want a huge lump. So just go in slightly from the outside line of the pad, and that will serve as your core pattern. So I have one cut out, but obviously use whatever you want. All of my original patterns, before I transferred them onto the clear plastic, they're all on like cardboard packaging. So that was actually really fantastic, really durable, easy to cut. So I would definitely recommend that if you haven't, if you just want to make, if you want to make a pattern that you're going to use multiple times, draw it out on some paper first so you get confident about the shape, and then trace it onto some cardboard packaging, because that stuff is amazing. The other thing I will say about patterns before we get off that topic, and I don't want to get too much into it because like I said, there's some really good videos out there, but I will kind of give you the measurements of this one for your reference. It is 9 3/4 inches long. The whole total like wingspan is 7 1/4, and then this section here in between the wings is about 3 inches long. The finished pad snaps to about 2.5 inches long. So those are some numbers for you if you want them. So now that the core is traced out, I'm going to go ahead and cut that out as well. Okay, so we have our 2 layers of terry cloth, and I find it easiest if you sew these together, so you don't have to try and worry your way through them when you are actually attaching them to the pad. So I'm just going to slide both those layers onto my sewing machine. Make sure I've got something wacky happening here. Something really wacky. Okay. So this right now is just threaded with like a standard polyester. I think this is kind of like an off-white color. I can tell you. It's Coats & Clark polyester number D4. Which I was using for wet bags earlier, but which is perfect for this creamy terry cloth. Obviously, the color thread you use, especially on the core, is really not terribly important, but if you want it to match, it can. So with a little bit of a back stitch at the beginning, I'm just going to go in a straight stitch all the way around the perimeter of the core, about, I would say about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the terry cloth. and then a little back stitch at the end as well. So now you have your core. You can see here how it got a little bit off of center with the top. I'm just going to trim that away. It's not necessary to trim it, but I don't know. I feel like being extra tidy today. The other thing you can see is a little bit of a ripple, which basically comes from the difference between the tension in the fabric and the stitching. If it's really pronounced, you can just press it. I would just press it with an iron, but it's not a big deal and it's not going to affect the efficacy of your pad at all. So I would just kind of, if it's like around this level of wonkiness, I would just go ahead as is to attach it to your topper. So you want to decide whether your topper has an obvious right or wrong side. I don't really think this one does, so I'm just going to pick the side that has the marker on it as the wrong side and lay the core right on top. See how it got a little stretched out right there and it's not really even? We can just trim that away when we go to do the sort of perimeter stitching. But for the moment, I'm going to leave it. So you want to just center your core in the center of your pad, and we are going to stitch a channel stitch right down the top. So my preference personally is to just use 2 rows of stitches that create kind of an hourglass along the top of the pad. You can certainly stitch along the entire perimeter of the core. A lot of people like that as well. It definitely keeps the core nice and secure. But for me, my preference is just to stitch the 2 channels. So I will show you how to do that. And I think I'm going to change thread. Well, let's not. Let's try and be good and just keep the same thread. So you can pin your core in place. If you're worried about it wiggling around on you, I would just put one through the whole core and the topper on the bottom. And one on the top, and that's just going to keep it in place. Then I'm going to set mine to my machine to like a decorative stitch. I'm going to do like a long wavy stitch, but you can do a straight stitch. You can do one of the decorative flowers or zigzags or cross stitch looking stitches or whatever you want, because the function of this stitch is really just to keep the core attached to the top. And as a result, you get to do it in a pretty way if you want to. But if either you're sewing by hand or you don't want to, or you have a machine that doesn't offer those stitches, you can very simply just do a straight stitch. So I start here in the top right hand corner, and I'm going to stitch all the way down to about the same distance from the edge on the bottom. Also a little back stitch on this one to knot the thread. And once you near the bottom, just sort of slow down to when you get to that point where you want the stitch to end, and do another back stitch or knotting stitch. And that's what you have on that side, so we're going to do exactly the same thing on the other edge. And just eyeball it to see that it's in about the same place. It doesn't need to be perfect. And give it another knot at the bottom. All right, so that's the whole top constructed. Take out the pins, trim your threads, and then you're going to want to look at the back and see if you've had any shifting around of the core. So for example, right here in this corner where it's just a little bit too close for comfort as far as getting around that edge, I'm just going to trim away so that I feel pretty confident that we can get the presser foot around that edge. And just trying to figure out which of these threads are still waiting to be trimmed off. All right. So now that the whole top is ready, we are going to attach it to the back. For this purpose, this demonstration, our back is going to be another piece of that t-shirt. This would be replaced by something like a fleece or PUL or nylon or flannel. If you're using a different material for your backing, that's going to give you a little bit more water, sort of moisture barrier situation. But since I didn't have anything in my house that I was ready to part with that meets that description, we're just going to use the rest of the t-shirt. What I like to do is leave this as a whole piece. I prefer not to cut it out. I find that I'm a lot more confident sewing when this piece is big and I don't have to worry too much about finding the right line and do I have the layers all together. So I prefer just to leave this piece larger than the whole pad. And then we're gonna lay the pad on top of it. Let's do it in the opposite direction so it's a little easier to see the contrast. So what we're gonna do now is line up the presser foot with the bottom of this tab, this turning tab, and we're gonna start sewing all the way around the entire perimeter. We're gonna use a straight stitch for this, and I prefer to set it on my brother, it's a 0 setting on a straight stitch, but I prefer to set it so it's as close to the core as we can get. So we'll do that stitching all the way around. So same thing here, you want to start with a little bit of a back stitch. You want to start with your needle threaded. My camera's complaining that we're running out of memory space. So start with the back stitch and then make your way slowly all around the entire pad. On the corners as you're sewing, if you need to sort of stop, lift your presser foot and slightly adjust the fabric in either direction, that will help you get around the curves with a little bit fewer lumps. So if you're self-conscious about that, or if you're concerned about your level of skill or whatever, or if it just makes for a tidier product for you, go ahead and just go slowly around those curves, lifting the presser foot as you need to with the needle down and rotating the fabric to a direction that helps get around that curve easier. All right, and when you're nearing the edge, come right back up to the other side of that tab, back stitch, so you're leaving the gap for turning right along that tab that we made earlier. So this is open right here. So the next thing that you're going to do is cut out this whole shape. I like to do this with pinking shears. These guys right here with the jaggedy cutting blades. So I'm going to cut it out and we will go from there. All right, it's starting to look pretty familiar. So the next thing you're going to want to do is trim your corners to help prevent any of that like weird bunching around the seams. Just those guys, trim it right into the thread, not going over the thread, so as close as you can get to that corner. You can cut notches up here if you want to, and around the around the curve of the wing. It definitely is going to help. I'm going to go ahead and skip it for this video. I don't think with this light jersey that it's going to matter too terribly much, but I am going to go ahead and trim away some of the extra fabric at the corners of the pad. Then you're going to reach inside this and turn it inside out. It kind of feels like a sock. So turn it completely inside out, and then we will work on closing it all up. One helpful thing when you're turning is to have some kind of a tool. I have this like giant chopstick that I just poke around, run it all the way along the edges to help get everything out from inside and get all the seams nice and flat. So carry on turning. We'll be right back. So once everything is turned the right way out, I like at this point to go ahead and press it because you do have this hole here. The fabric, especially when you're working with something like a cotton or jersey like this one, you will find that it likes to sort of go in that hole, which is convenient. But I do like to press it just to make sure, and so that I'm confident that that hole is going to close up in the seam that we sew around it. So I'm going to go ahead and press it and then go back to the machine. Okay, so starting with your presser foot right on top of that gap, because we want to close that up early so we don't have to worry about it, you're going to do exactly the same perimeter stitch as we did to attach the back to the top, but it's going to close the entire pad and give it a nice finished look. So I'm going to go ahead and do a straight stitch around the entire perimeter. Okay, so once you've sewn all the way around your pad, all you have left to do is trim the little threads and decide on a closure. I'm going to leave that up to you. There are a huge variety. You can use cam snaps, you can use any of the plastic snaps, you can use the metal sew-on snaps, you can use a bra closure, you can use Velcro, you can use a button, you can use a ribbon and tie. Really be open to options that aren't necessarily the snaps. I'm going to use snaps because I have them on hand and because I think it's the fastest way to finish the product, but don't feel that it's a necessity in terms of making your pads. I will be doing an additional tutorial without snaps, so keep a lookout for that if you are interested or concerned about the closure options, but really there are so many choices, so don't worry too much about it. I'm going to go ahead and finish mine and then we will look at the final product. Okay, so we are totally done. I think it looks fantastic. I put 2 snaps on for different underwear choices, and we have this great, cute wavy stitching and this beautiful tie-dye. I think this t-shirt was free at some corporate meeting or something. So this is just 2 materials and your closure. I love how it turned out. I think it will actually be one that I wear a lot. And I'm going to be doing upcoming pad tutorial with just one material. So look forward to that. And please, if you have any questions, let me know. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you will try it out, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.